Ms. Kearns, thank you very much for the time. I want to begin with the very fact that you raised the alarm of potential violence in Gaza long before it happened. Why do you think your warnings were ignored?
I mean, look, none of us saw it happening in the way it had, and yes, I said that we'd see the Gaza crisis of 2023, but I never imagined the crimes against humanity that we saw perpetrated against Israel. It is difficult. There is nothing easy about the Middle East, but I think with the focus, the tilt, as the British government previously called it, to the Middle East, to the Indo-Pacific, that was a tilt away from the Middle East. You can't tilt to something without tilting away from something else. And the Middle East is difficult, it's complex, there's no easy wins. Whereas in the UK over the last few years, it's very easy to be the #1 supporter of Ukraine, to get that glory, to enjoy that position. And so I think sometimes the hard work can fall behind the scenes, but also there were no easy answers to this. It needed hard work and it needed sustained hard work.
So why do you think Hamas launched its attack on October the 7th? So large, so brutal, and yet they must have known Israel would respond.
Because they weren't acting in the interest of the people of Palestine, let alone the people of Gaza. Look, I remember doing an interview the day after and I was asked exactly this, why do this? And the only answer I could come to was that it was about Iran. And we've seen an increasingly assertive, increasingly muscular Iran, whether it be in Iraq, whether it be in Yemen, whether it be in the UK, on our UK streets. Iran has become more and more assertive. And yes, I think a lot of it did have to do with Saudi-Israel normalization processes, but it wasn't just that. So I think there's a lot to be asked about where and what and why, and I think it's too early for us to say that we know for definite that it was only because of Iran, but you can't take Iran out of the picture.
I want to pick up on a point that you said, the fact that Hamas was actually not interested in the well-being of the Palestinian people, because you say here in Halifax that Israel should not be calling this an offensive or a war against Hamas, but rather a counterintelligence offensive. Why the importance of that label?
So they're not at war with the people of Palestine. They're not at war with the people of Gaza, but there is a terrorist group that committed crimes against humanity who need to be taken out. A counterterrorism operation is very different to a war. A counterterrorism operation is more controlled, it's more measured, it's more patient, and it's very clear from that operation that you are not targeting civilians, but that you have a single focus. What we saw with the operations, for example, against Daesh, was that we weren't allowed to go into a territory to liberate it unless we had a reconstruction plan. Where's the reconstruction plan for Gaza? Who's going to reconstruct Gaza? Who's going to pay for that reconstruction? Counterterrorism operations allow you that space to breathe and allow the best possible space for political process. We are only going to end this with a political process. But when you announce a war on Gaza, all the civilians of Gaza may ask if they are a target. Neighboring countries may say, you're at war with Gaza, you're not trying to just defeat a terrorist group. So I think the distinctions are not just in how you prosecute it, but also the day after, how we get to peace.
But also the tactics you use, though, because if you were to call it a counterterrorism operation, we're seeing something arguably far larger than that right now.
Yeah, we absolutely are. And so with the counterterrorism operation, again fighting ISIS, I think we did something like 300,000 hours of RPAS flying for every one airstrike that took place. Israel conducted 6,000 airstrikes in a week in Gaza. In Libya, we did something like 7,600 in a whole year. There is a demonstrable difference in that. Also, currently, Israel is focused on destroying civilian infrastructure. Now, is that to allow for a ground invasion, so there's less house-to-house fighting? Is it so they can clear the space to do ground-penetrating attacks to get into the tunnels? I just don't know. But it is a very different type of tactic. And actually, a counterterrorism operation, I think, would have kept international support for longer, allowing Israel to truly eviscerate Hamas, but by doing so in a very measured, proportionate, disciplined way.
But, and we've heard it not only from Israeli officials, but American officials as well, they put the blame on Hamas.
Yeah.
They put the blame on Hamas for these civilian casualties because they say that they have spent these years building hundreds of miles of tunnels underground, particularly under civilian infrastructure, places like hospitals and schools. What do you say to that?
So there's no question, Hamas went in, they committed crimes against humanity and they attacked Israel. There is also no question that Hamas is hiding amongst civilian infrastructure and has done that for a very long time. But there is something called a collateral damage percentage that every military has, and that's about making sure you're upholding your Geneva Convention responsibilities. Under that, there is a percentage that you agree to how much collateral damage, how many civilians can be killed for every target that you prosecute and decide to take out. I would challenge that Israel has not made it the right percentage. In the UK, it's always sat, as I understand it, around 2 to 3%. In the past, Israel's operated something as high as 20 to 25%. You still have to make decisions. Yes, if a terrorist group is using a civilian infrastructure, that is a war crime, but terrorists don't care. We shouldn't be comparing Israel's actions to those of Hamas. One is a democratic country, and one is a brutal, genocidal terrorist organization. So yes, civilian targets, civilian locations, infrastructure can become legitimate targets, but you still have to decide as a country within the Geneva Conventions whether or not your strike is proportionate enough and how much collateral damage you are willing to accept. And I would argue that Israel is not getting that balance right as yet.
The Israeli Prime Minister, we should point out though, of course you know this, has expressed his reservations, his doubts about a two-state solution. What's your reaction to that?
So when I've met with Palestinians, they've also told me that they think a two-state solution is dead. When you meet with average Israelis, they also say that a two-state solution is dead. For me, I do not see how we make a one-state solution work. I do not see a future for that. But there is no question that over the last 9 months, what we have seen from Netanyahu's government is far-right, ultra-Orthodox, denial of the rights of Palestinians to exist, maps that have denied the existence of Jordan to hold on to its territorial integrity, and we have seen comments from the Knesset around let's use nuclear bombs, let's raze Gaza to the ground. Contrast that to Ukraine. Ukrainian MPs have not been out doing interviews saying let's destroy Russia, let's eviscerate Russia, let's drop a nuclear bomb on Russia. These are not things they have been doing. And so I think there's a really important conversation there about the need, the disparity. So Ukraine knew it needed to maintain international support. Israel seems to be taking the approach of doing as much as they can before they assume that they will eventually lose support. Surely we want Israel to be able to prosecute this operation for as long as they need to defeat Hamas, but they should want to maintain international support, not be essentially running the clock out.
And of course, we have heard more calls from international leadership for greater restraint, among them the Canadian Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of this country, Justin Trudeau. What do you make of that call? What's your assessment of that call?
So I think I feel very strongly that the lack of the use of the word restraint from the start was a major error. How Israel prosecutes this matters, and our ability, be it Canada, be the UK, to be a voice for rule of law, to speak plainly to our allies, matters for our ability to be future arbiters of conflicts. If this was Canada or if this was the US that was doing what Israel's currently doing, we would speak out against them. We would say to them, you need to do better. We would still grieve with them. We would still want to help them defeat the terrorist group whose sole goal is to eviscerate them. It is an existential threat. But I'm concerned it took so long for many Western politicians to be able to talk about restraint. And now that we have a UN agreement to a humanitarian pause, we need to make sure that those happen and that they are genuine pauses where we can get aid in, get hostages out, and help get our nationals who are still in Gaza out as well to safety.
So, of course, we'll continue to watch what's happening between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. But, before we're done, you compared what Israel's doing to what Ukraine is doing. I do want to ask about that, because during this conference in Halifax, you essentially say that the West has abdicated its responsibility to Ukraine with the kind of support that's been provided so far. What do you mean by that? Because we haven't done enough. We have given Ukraine enough to survive, but not to win. We have a choice. What are we looking to achieve here? What we should be looking to do is to make sure that Russia does not gain territory as a result of violence. Sovereignty cannot be achieved through violence. That's a message that matters for Xi Jinping and for many other people around the world to hear. And yet we consistently only give them enough to survive. And as Zelensky has said, since the appalling attacks on Israel, we have seen a slowdown in the delivery of artillery to Ukraine. And we're not even into the full winter phase yet. We have to stand by them. We have to support them fully. Ms. Kearns, I really appreciate the time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.